Let's bring in our GM, Rick Spielman, who's joined by Pete Prisco, our NFL analyst, joining us here on HQ. Rick, I'll start with you. What were some other big takeaways with your conversation with Bowers?
You know, he's just a physically imposing player, not when you look at him, but on the field and the way he plays the game. He may be the best tight end, in my opinion, that came out as far as a route runner, ability to get separation, the way he dominated at the collegiate level, at the SEC level, and I think that's going to carry on to the NFL as a mismatch because, Pete, tight ends are huge in offensives now in the NFL.
Yeah, and the thing that stands out to me is his hands. I mean, when the ball gets near him, he sucks that thing in. He's got great hands. And I think you made the comparison to combo Kelsey-Kittle. I think he really is a lot like Kelsey. And the way he runs and the way he catches the football and the way he handles himself. He's not a great blocker. He's a willing blocker, but he's a heck of a receiver, and I think he's going to be a big-time producer in the NFL.
You guys bring up something that's interesting. You bring up Kelsey and Kittle. If I threw Mark Andrews there, they've kind of been the standard in the tight end position. And we saw guys like Pitts, Hockenson, Fant, Hurst, and Howard try to make that next wave. Guys didn't really pan out super-wise, but last year we get Kincaid, we get Laporta, we get Musgrave. If I were to just ask you to put last year's rookies into this pot with Bowers, Pete Prisco, where would you rank the Georgia tight end among the Kincaids and the Musgraves and the Laportas of the world?
Oh, I think he's first. And look, we saw what those guys did last year, and every single one of them had an impact. And there were a lot of tight ends last year having major impacts on the game. And if you go back to the championship round, you saw all the tight ends that were in that round. I mean, Kelsey and Kittle and Andrews. And, I mean, the tight end position is such a big part of the offense, the way you can split them out and create mismatches. But if you had to rank the board on those tight ends, he would be number one.
Yeah, by far. He's the best tight end I've seen since Kyle Pitts came out. And Kyle Pitts really hasn't shown what he's capable of yet, probably because of the quarterback play down in Atlanta. But if this kid gets with a good quarterback and an offensive coordinator that knows how to use his talents, he's going to have a very, very productive rookie season.
It's interesting you mentioned Pitts because they just showed the graphic of the top 10 tight ends, and the top 10 tight ends haven't worked out as expected. Hawkinson's a good player, but he's not playing for the team that picked him. Kyle Pitts hasn't worked out. Ebron was okay. He wasn't great. Vernon Davis was a good player, but not great. And then Kellen Winslow obviously had some issues.
The only thing I'm going to argue with you is the game has changed, and the tight end position has changed, and how offensive coordinators are using them. So when you feature a tight end...
Well, two of them are still playing.
Yeah, I know, but Hawkinson's a good player. How can you say that?
Well, he's not playing for the team that drafted him. I mean,
because they traded him for other reasons.
Right. Well, again, he's not playing for the team that drafted him. So drafting a tight end in the first round is tough in the top 10. You got to admit that. It's not. It's a risk.
It's not.
You would take him in the top 10?
I would take him in the top 10.
Okay. I wouldn't.
That's just the peak of NFL Sundays with these two on a weekly basis. And obviously, our guy Ryan Wilson does not have Bowers in the top 10. He does have him in the mid-teens, but there's an opportunity for Bowers to join that list that we showed there in terms of being selected top 10. Rick, let's get to the tight end class after Bowers. Is it a deep class? How would you characterize it?
I don't think it's as deep as last year's class, but my second favorite tight end as we've gone through this process is Senat from Kansas State. He is, to me, similar to a lot of things we've seen in Laporta when he came out last year. He's a good blocker. You can play him at fullback. You can play him at H-back. You can play him at tight end. And I think he's going to be a weapon in the passing game. So out of him listed, which I see him number 3rd, I would put him right behind Brock Bowers because he's a complete tight end and is a very good football player.
I'm with you on that one. I love the kid. I mean, you watch Kansas State play, and he's all over the field. He makes a ton of plays. He's a physical kid. You know, you don't necessarily love Sanders, the tight end from Texas, because he doesn't block, but he's a good receiving tight end, and I think he's got the ability to stretch the field a little bit down the middle of the field. He might end up being a really good receiver on the next level.
Right, but when I'm looking at this, when you look at the Kittles in the world who become, and the Laportas, you got to admit, Laporta was a very good blocker in Detroit's offense this year. So when you can find these guys that are complete tight ends that not only can affect the running game by the way they block and the effort they block with, but what they can do athletically in the passing game.
Guys, what's been the buzz surrounding the DB, specifically Bama's pair of Arnold and McKinstry?
I'm going to talk about these corners especially because I think this is a unique corner class. I think there is not a Deion Sanders in the top 10, but I think there is a lot of good corners, but they all have different traits to fit different schemes in the NFL. So if you're a man cover team, you may look at a Wiggins or a Rakestraw from Missouri or Wiggins from Clemson. If you're a zone cover team, you may look at the DeJeans of the world and the McKinstries of the world and the Terrion Arnolds of the world. Some of them, and don't forget about Quinyon Williams, who was an outstanding down at the Senior Bowl that can play both man and zone. So I think these guys will all be first-round talents, but they will come off differently based on what team is selecting them, based on what that team runs from a schematic standpoint. Do they want a zone corner or a man corner?
But to your point, there isn't Deion Sanders, there isn't a Jalen Ramsey, there isn't a Sauce Gardner in this class. There's not that one guy. It's a good group, and there are a lot of good players, but there's not that one guy, which is why I don't think they're going to go in the top 10. I don't think
no corner is going to go in the top 10 this year, but there'll be 5 corners that go in the first round, maybe 6.
It's a good, solid group. It's not a great group.
So I'm hearing you had some time with Terrion Arnold, Rick, during the season, maybe offering him some advice, maybe to elevate some of the stock there. What more, again, can you tell us about him specifically?
Yeah, no, I got an opportunity to visit with Terrion Arnold down in Alabama. And honestly, I told him he didn't play very good in the first half of the season. Right after the Tennessee game, he got hurt. Jetty was covering that game down there and did not finish the game. I met with him right after that game, and then how he played coming out of the bye the second half. He had 4 interceptions. He played with much more confidence, much better technique. He can show he can play over the slot. He can play outside. His ball instincts and awareness just all of a sudden lit up, and he became more physical as a tackler. So kudos to him for taking from what he's shown early in the season and how he finished the season. And by the way he finished, he may be the first corner off the board.
You know, and Tommy knows that. Rick motivates us every single Sunday. Tommy knows exactly how that works.
We're taking a look at that prospect breakdown. Also, something I've noticed lately, and I don't know if it's a trend, guys. You guys are out there, and you guys can tell me whether it is or not. And I point to Sauce Gardner, the length of DBs that are now 6 feet or taller seem to be maybe coming through the draft more right now. Rick, from a talent evaluation standpoint, are we seeing a little bit more in terms of height from a position we typically don't associate it with?
Yeah, in the past, you always seen these little Pete Prisco slot corners that can play nickel. Yeah, tough little nickel guys that can't run or not very athletic, but good football players. But now you're seeing these long corners, and I think what colleges are doing, just because if you look at this receiver class, there's not a lot of small receivers. There's a lot of length, and some of these guys that may not be receivers turn out to be corners, and they train them to be corners. So you're getting a lot more long, a lot more athletic type corners. When you look at this board here, Quinyon Mitchell, all these guys are going to play in the NFL, and they're all going to have an impact their rookie year.
You know what's interesting about that, though? You do get a lot of longer corners, and I remember having a conversation with Patrick Peterson about that. He's a longer corner, and they have problems with the smaller receivers, the shifty receivers, so you might start seeing more and more of these little shifted. The Tank Dells of the world start having success against these longer corners, so it's a tough matchup for them. They're easier to match up against bigger receivers than it is for the smaller receivers.
It's like an evolution, so they'll come back to you as a nickel corner in this league eventually.
Right.
What's old is always new again, and there's always cycles, isn't there, fellas? Or thanks to Pete Prisco and Rick Spielman from Indianapolis. Again, with the first pick, as Rick Spielman and Ryan Wilson collecting all of these interviews. I was texting Ryan. He said on their next podcast, bold predictions ahead of players working out at the Combine.